And we're back. I'm Jake. This is Zach, and this is the QB Lab podcast, the only show dedicated to the greatest position in all professional sports. And I'm sure you can see right beside me, we've got an incredible guest today, a true NFL veteran, 15-year quarterback who suited up for some of the best franchises in the NFL, from the New England Patriots to the San Francisco 49ers. He's won a Super Bowl, mentored countless QBs, earned a reputation as one of the smartest and most respected minds in the game. Please welcome Brian Hoyer. Brian, how you doing
Welcome to the
today?
show.
What's up, guys? I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
We're awesome. And it's great to have you. Great to talk football. We got a lot to cover. I think when we look at your career, a great place to start your home, the team that you root for, what it seems like every day, the New England Patriots. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on there, because there's some exciting things brewing, right? They got Drake Maye working with Josh McDaniels, who we know you have a ton of experience with. I'm curious to get your take on both May as a quarterback, but also how he'll fit well with Josh McDaniels, and given your understanding of his systems and how well he'll be able to utilize May and some of his running ability too, because I think people forget that he's really a true dual threat quarterback.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's start with Drake. I think I've got to see up close and personal, living in the Foxborough, Boston area the last 2 years, just how talented this kid is. And I think the one thing that stood out to me last year, after getting thrown into the fire with, let's just call it a not great season, right? It starts off, and I'm very close to Jacoby Brissett, so I was rooting for Jacoby early on, and they go down to Cincinnati and win the opener. I'm like, all right, it's going to be okay. Well, it took a bad dive quick, and at a certain point they threw Drake in and said, go out and just, you know, learn, by the fire, thrown in the fire, go out there and do it. And he learned. And I think there was the one thing that you saw was he was very intentional. If you saw him make a certain mistake one week, he really didn't repeat it. And I think that's a really good sign of a young quarterback. And when it comes to raw talent, you're talking about a guy who's 6'5", 230, can run, and throw on the run. All of the things that I know you guys as Bill fans have witnessed Josh Allen do over the years. So I think that's what people are looking at, like, as the ceiling. Can Drake May get to that Josh Allen level type of player? And I love this pairing with him and Josh. And as you mentioned before, I have a lot of experience with Josh. And I think the system really empowers Drake to, one, use his skill set, two, be the leader on the field, and three, go out and be the quarterback that he really is talented enough to be. And that's in the passing game. You mentioned the running game. And I think as a leader, I think the one thing that I was so impressed with last year watching this guy as this young 21-year-old rookie is how well he handled the outside noise, right? He handled the post-game interviews so well for a guy who was thrust in the spotlight. And I think that was very endearing to his teammates. And you see the respect that he has from a guy like Hunter Henry, from a guy like Austin Hooper, from these guys who've been veterans, have been around other quarterbacks. And the way they talk about him was very telling to me. And so I think I'm really excited for him to really take the ownership over the system. Now, look, it's never easy to go from 1 year and one system, different terminology, to another year with a new coach, new system, new terminology. But by all accounts, he's doing really well with it. I was in the stadium practice a few weeks ago. I saw him changing plays. I saw him getting into the right protections, making mic points, which is obviously a staple of running that Josh McDaniels offense, something that um, is not easy to learn. And he's getting thrown at him every day. And so by all accounts, he's doing a really good job of it. Now, look, he didn't have a great decision in the preseason game. Got to just take a sack sometimes, not try to throw it away. And Vrabel held him accountable, which I think is another great thing. I think the one thing here last year, no one really wanted to get on Drake, right? He's our future. He's our rookie. People were quick to defend him. I think Mike's going to hold him to a standard that he knows that he can play at. And I think that'll push Drake to just become an even better player.
Yeah, one question I would have for you on that one is Josh McDaniels often gets touted with these option heavy offenses, and you have Drake May, who's really learning how to
Mhm.
be the NFL quarterback that he wants to be. If you were an offensive coordinator, you're in his position. Josh McDaniels, he's widely regarded. He's a genius. He's
Yes.
able from one week to another have one game plan and completely throw it out and get a new game plan for the following week. And Drake Maye, he has a lot of. I'm sure Josh McDaniels is super happy about the type of weapons that Drake Maye is bringing to the table, and he can probably envision cool ways of using different strengths from one week to another. But if you were in his position, given the types of talent that Drake Maye does bring to the table, how would you think about easing him into these systems and getting him to really study quickly to try to be as dangerous of a weapon as possible?
Well, look, I was there for Mac Jones' rookie year, and by all accounts, Mac had a tremendous rookie year, right? He went to
Yeah.
the Pro Bowl, we went to the playoffs, and Mac was a very cerebral quarterback. That was his greatest strength. And there was times where Mac would come out to practice and he would remike the protection, he would alert to a play, and I'm thinking to myself, like, they must have told this guy in practice on play 38 of practice, this weak safety will blitz is coming. You're gonna have to do. Mac was just very he had a photographic memory. He understood things, and so I think what I saw with Josh was when the quarterback proves that he can handle something you've already given him, you give him a little more, and when he proves that he can handle that, you give him a little more and a little more, and eventually he has full control. Now, look, for me, when I came into the league, Bill O'Brien was the offensive coordinator of this offense here in New England, and I learned under him, and it was the same way. It would have taken me probably a full solid year to feel comfortable going out and playing in a game. Now, fortunate for me, I backed up Tom Brady, who's as tough as they come, and I never was thrust into that role. But I remember coming back in my second season and understanding the why of the play, not just the what. And I think that's always the goal, is to get to, you want to know when Josh calls the play in exactly why he's calling that play. What's the goal of that play? Obviously, general football fans would say, well, it's to score a touchdown. Well, yeah, obviously that's what the goal is of every single play. But within the intricacies of the game, the situational play of the game, it might be he's calling a certain pass against an elite pass rush and it's a zone defense and he wants you to get the ball out on time. You know, I've been in those meetings and here, and that was one of the greatest privileges in my career, was to watch Tom Brady and Josh McDaniels go over a game plan, go over a call sheet, and hear Tom say, you know, on this play, the ball's coming out of my hand no matter what. And I think people, you know, they just say, well, he's the greatest of all time. Well, what made him great? He understood the why of everything. And Josh was right there with him. And I didn't get to really have that many opportunities to actually play for Josh. I mean, I went into a game in Vegas when Jimmy G got hurt, and oddly enough, against the Patriots. And that was probably the most extensive work I ever played with Josh calling plays. And it went really well. I knew what he was looking for. And I thought we had a good, you know, connection there with his play calling and the execution. But it is very detailed. I mean, there are some offenses that just say, look, we want to keep it simple for the quarterback. There's a lot to think about. You know, just call the play. He doesn't have to worry about the protection. He doesn't have to worry about changing the play. Just read the play left to right. And that's okay too. But you better have elite skill players in order to do that. A great offensive line when you want to take that away from the quarterback's hands of being able to get into the right play.
And just to touch on that, I think the last piece I talking about that you obviously didn't get a lot of time to play under McDaniels, but you had a lot of connections with him and you were in New England. And when you look at that in terms of continuity, how important it is to have that same coordinator for multiple years.
Mm-hmm.
Although we see a lot of quarterbacks where they have different coordinators and they still find success. I mean, Josh Allen's a perfect example. They've now switched coordinators a few times and he's managed to excel in every situation. Obviously, Brady was fortunate to have McDaniels around for so long. I'm curious to get your take in terms of how difficult it is when you get that new coordinator coming into a successful organization like the Patriots. Are they sort of falling in line and trying to keep things close to what they were? Or are things completely shifting and therefore you're almost starting from the ground up all over again?
I mean, continuity is key in the NFL, and unfortunately, in a league of what have you done for me lately, it's not very feasible, right? It's funny you mentioned Josh Allen, because to me, when you look at Josh's career, when did he really start to blossom? Brian Daboll comes in as the offensive coordinator, and I have so much respect for Daboll, who runs a similar system to what I mean, Josh and Daboll came from Michigan State, from under Nick Saban to Bill Belichick. They were basically raised in that same offensive system. The one cool thing that I thought about Dayball was he had gone down to Alabama and learned some of those RPO, zone read, those types of things. Now you get to go like kind of go and play around with that with Josh Allen. And Josh had a tremendous year. Now, after Dayball left, there was a little bit of Josh trying to put the team on his back until Joe Brady takes over, that he really wants to emphasize being a balanced offense. So they have Dalvin Cook, they run the ball more, and it allows Josh to really kind of settle in and be the player that he really turned into be, which was the MVP. So it is, I think the one thing is great players can adjust. When you're talking about a quarterback, really the hardest part I always thought was the language. It's from going from speaking English to Spanish to Chinese to every system has their own language. The plays are really the same. No one's reinventing the wheel. Everybody copies off of each other anyways. It's how your terminology is taught to the players, taught to the quarterback, and how well can you retain that. So for instance, I basically was raised in the Patriots system. We called plays a certain way. My first time being out of that system was playing for North Turner, which was another different way of calling the plays. It was almost backwards in my mind of how I was used to doing it. So I had to adjust to that. Then I went to go play for Kyle Shanahan, which was completely different from both. And so ideally, the thing that you want to focus on most is the terminology and how that translates to what you're seeing on the paper. Because like I said, for the most part, everybody's running the same plays. It's how do you call those plays and get the people to be in the right spots.
So you speak a
Yeah,
good 6 to 8 languages by now, right?
Look, I'm probably one of the few guys who's played in pretty much every family tree system that there is. I mean, you really look at, and this is something that I've gotten to understand throughout my career. There's really three trees of offensive football, right? There's the West Coast, the Bill Walsh, there's the Air Coryell, and then there's the Earhart system, which is really modified into this Patriot system. Those are the big three. Let's call them the tree trunks, right? But then all of a sudden, people, the branches start weaving together, and so I'd get to one place and I'm like, you guys call that Hoss too? But we're not calling it. The formations are different. The protections are different. Where'd you guys get that? Where'd you get that terminology for Hoss? And he's like, well, I was with so-and-so in this place and it made sense to me. And so things start to weave together, but there are core fundamentals. And I think that those usually come down to like that, the core terminology, your formations, your protections, your motions, your run game. Those are really the things that kind of are different from place to place, and then some other things start to blend together. So it's interesting to see all the different interweaving of family trees.
it's a really cool point. For me, with the Drake Maye side of it, I'm really excited to see how much he uses his legs. His stats out of college, like we talked about on the last show, that he actually had a quicker 40 time out of college than Josh Allen even had. And I selfishly would love to see him get like 5+ design runs a game, see something like that, which I know isn't typical given the types of Josh McDaniel offenses he's run in the past. Where do you think Drake Maye, how often do you think we'll see Drake Maye using his legs? How do you think that factors into the situation? Because it also adds another layer of complexity beyond potentially an already complex offense.
Yeah, look, I think the greatest thing about Josh is he's adaptable, and you mentioned it before, from week to week, from quarter to quarter, even. And I think the one thing that last year being away from the game allowed him to do was travel around the country and see some things and see, how, being at Ohio State, how do they implore some of those schemes that you're talking about? The biggest thing to me at the NFL level is how do you keep your quarterback healthy, right? Because yeah, Drake is big, fast, and athletic, but he also had two concussions last year, right? Or at least one for sure. I mean, one where he came out of the game. There was another one where he got checked. They was able to go back in. That was fine. But I think the biggest thing is when you're designing these plays, look, these are big dudes that are coming to hit you. And as at the quarterback position, you get hit enough as it is, just dropping back and passing the ball 30 times a game. So let's say you add 5 more in there. And the one thing I always remember, which look, they were never scheming runs for me, but I would talk to Kyle Shanahan about his time in Washington with RG3. And the one thing he always emphasized was, yeah, I ran Robert a lot, but I always gave him a lead blocker. I always gave him a lead blocker, and I always try to give him the sideline so that when the play came to an end, he could step out of the sideline. He had to be smart about it. So I think you definitely want to do it, but you have to be smart about it because that's the future of your franchise right there. And you don't want him getting that territory with the concussions. Look, I've dealt with concussions, and people are very aware, and they're very serious thing. So you got to be smart with it, but you definitely want to utilize it. So I'm excited. I think, look, we're not going to see it in any preseason games. They're not going to show that, right? But it'll spring up here and there, and I think they just got to be smart about it. And Drake ultimately has to be smart about it.
Yeah. Shifting gears a little bit here, you were in Cleveland during 2014 when Johnny Manziel was here. And it's very interesting how history tends to repeat itself of we've got ourselves another very interesting quarterback room where you've got Shador Sanders there, where you got a situation where you're trying to balance the amount of hype around a quarterback room with also kind of the steady development. Because I imagine they want to grow Shador and maybe even Dylan Gabriel into a quarterback of the future. Based on kind of what you saw up close, what kind of pitfalls would you kind of recommend that these new quarterbacks that have these hype around them try to avoid? And how would you think about mentoring them to try to get them to, a successful quarterback career?
Yeah, I think look, you think they'd learn their lesson, but it just seems like they keep doing the same thing over and over again. And look, I felt bad for Shador. I mean, look, I was a guy who basically fell out of the draft. I wasn't drafted, so I know the feeling. But I actually thought Shador was a better quarterback than Dylan Gabriel. So by doing that, the Browns themselves created the controversy. It's not Shador's fault. It's not Dylan Gabriel's fault. They chose to do that. And it didn't get any easier for them when Shador goes out and plays really well in the preseason game. And now he's got an oblique injury, and Dylan Gabriel is coming back for an injury. It's just a mess. And ultimately, I think what's going to happen is Joe Flacco is going to be the starting quarterback. And as long as the Browns are in contention, they're going to ride him as long as they can go. At a certain point, with the trade that they made with Jacksonville, they're clearly accumulating picks so that they have the ability to potentially draft a quarterback in the first round next year. But at some point, you got to let these young guys out there and see what they can do. That way, whether you need to use that pick next year or trade up to get up a Drew Alar or a Arch Manning, whatever it might be. We don't know how that'll go yet. To me, it's hard to really deal with that because the team is the one that really put themselves in that situation, and now they're trying to figure out, well, how do we do this? We don't want the hype around the situation to get out of control. Well, you drafted an electric guy who has a lot of charisma and following and all of those things, and you drafted him after you drafted another quarterback. So how do you deal with all of that? And I think the one thing that they have to do is just let it play out on the field. That's the biggest thing, and forget about what you and I and everybody else is talking about. I think Kevin Stefanski is a really good coach. He's a good quarterback coach. He's had success with a lot of different guys. He's going to know based on how guys are answering questions in the meetings, how are they doing in walkthroughs, how are they doing in practices. The thing that kills me now with social media, any random fan can go to practice, record 3 or 4 clips, go out there and trash or build up some guy, and then the rest of the hype train leaves the station. You can't bring it back in, and so that's for the organization, is to manage those expectations, manage the hype. But unfortunately, now you would have loved to see Shador go out and have another great week and really separate himself from Gabriel Pickett to kind of put himself in line to compete with Joe Flacco. But now, I mean, an oblique injury at quarterback is rough because you really can't throw the football without using your oblique. So we'll see how long it keeps him out.
Yeah, it's interesting because it almost felt like a bit of a lose-lose situation by having him start as
Mhm.
the quarterback in week one, because either he does really well and
Yep.
everyone's like, I demand he be the starter in week one,
Right.
or he doesn't do well and it's like, oh, now this is making Shador take an even farther step back, despite the
Yeah.
fact he's already projected so low in the depth chart.
Man, Cleveland fans they're looking for any kind of hope that they can get. So Shador going out there and playing well, to your point, they're like, man, this is, but you also have to have the realistic expectations. And I think, look, Shador didn't choose what team Carolina put out there. He didn't choose what coverages they play, but we all know preseason games are pretty vanilla, right? Like, I've been in a part of preseason games where the coach basically comes in and said, all right, look, I talked to the other team's coach. There's not going to be any all out blitz tonight. They're not going to run any exotic coverages. It's basically going to be man coverage all night long. And so it's like being a hitter and knowing I'm only going to get fastballs. So he's got to continue to progress, but which unfortunately now he's dealing with this injury. So we don't know when he'll be back.
Yeah, it was cool though, seeing all the Cleveland fans in the stands, seeing all of their hopes tied on this quarterback during that preseason opener. It's interesting how his persona, there's going to be people that fall in love with it because of the hype that's around him, but he's also still must watch TV for all the doubters. And it's very interesting when you've got that archetype in football. I imagine it's good for business, and it's something that Cleveland's been looking for quite some time.
Yeah, definitely.
And another quarterback I want to talk about here, because there are some other big names that came out of the draft, and massive one in Cam Ward to the Titans. And knowing some of your experience with Bo Hardigree, I'm curious to know how he might be able to use Cam Ward, and how Cam Ward is going to look in a rookie season. Although he was the top pick, he actually hasn't had that much hype. it's been very quiet in terms of talk about it. I'm curious to see how they use him. I'm curious your take on what we can expect to see from him in his rookie season.
Yeah, I really like Cam Ward coming out of college and doing some, pre-draft work and some of my media responsibilities. He's got a quick release, and the one thing that I loved about him is he got better each and every year. Right? I believe he started at Incarnate Word, goes to Washington State, gets better, goes to Miami, gets better. I mean, a guy like that who's willing to just continue to grow is a great sign. And you're right. He was overshadowed by a guy who ultimately was picked a lot later in the draft, but I think he kind of just has this workers, mentality, like go in, work, get better, go in, work, get better. I've read stories from Brian Callahan saying, man, he beats me into the building sometimes. And I think having Bo will be great. My first experience with Bo was Mac's rookie year, and what he did for a rookie quarterback in that room. I mean, these guys would be stay. I'd be like, all right, I got to go home, wife, kids, like 6:30, 7 o'clock. We've been here since 6 a.m. They would stay till 9 o'clock, and Bo would just sit there with Mac and just go over the reads, go over coverage, go over protection. He knows what he's doing, and we always call him the drill master. Bo has more drills when it comes to quarterbacks than anybody else, and so I know that he's going to have Cam Ward's fundamentals on point. That's the biggest thing because Bo is on top of that, and ultimately, look, he's not the offensive coordinator, but he has some great ideas when it comes to play calling. He had an opportunity when Josh was let go in Vegas. He took over the play calling duties and really did a good job, in my opinion. So to have this ecosystem around your young quarterback of guys that can really help a Cam Ward, and I thought Cam Ward looked great in the preseason game. Right, looked comfortable in the pocket, was slinging it out there with that 3/4 release. So it'll be exciting. Look, the Titans aren't the best team quite yet, but at least they have something to build with. They have Calvin Ridley, so I expect he'll be throwing the ball to him a lot this year.
Calvin Ridley was getting an elite level of separation there. And what I was impressed by was Cam didn't even feel the need to resort to his legs in the same way that you saw him play in Miami. He looked really comfortable out there. And I wonder how much of like going into a preseason game like that, do you think Bo is saying, hey, take it easy. We don't want you to get injured. Try to just be in the pocket as much as possible? Or like, when do you think we start seeing him go to his legs a bit more?
Yeah, I think maybe a little bit of both there, but I think the one thing that I said about all really, I think Cam and Shador, they use their legs in college more to extend the play to throw. They're not, I wouldn't say elite like runners, scramblers. The one thing I get a little nervous about is I don't know if they have the Jaden Daniels type of speed to do that. And not that you have to be extremely fast, but when you looked at their pocket mobility in college, there's going to be some goons chasing after him here. Like Miles Garrett is going to be there a lot faster than the defensive end from Louisville or whoever it might have been out in Colorado, whatever it might be. And so that to me will be the biggest thing is how well can they do it at the NFL level? They did it great at the college level, but what are you going to do now if you think you're going to go extend the play and all of a sudden the pocket's collapsing a lot faster, guys are chasing from the backside faster. So we'll see. But look, he looked comfortable in the pocket. I thought he stepped up really well on a few throws, seemed comfortable, not feeling like he had to get outside the pocket to extend the play, which I would have to imagine Bo is doing a lot of drills to try to prevent him from trying to escape outside the back of the pocket. Cause that's usually where you get yourself in trouble, right? You can't see the backside defensive end, ball gets knocked out. Ideally, you like to push up into the pocket, find a window, slide one way or the other.
Yeah, it's a big piece, and I've noticed throughout preseason is really looking at these rookie quarterbacks and looking at how quickly they're leaving the pocket, because that to me is a sign of, they got the happy feet, they're a little nervous, they're not quite calm and poised. Or to your point, defensive ends got a lot more speed, and you got to get moving a lot faster than maybe you expected, or what you saw in college. So it's an interesting take, yeah, because I noticed that Cam Ward, for the most part, was pretty confident, pretty calm, great arm, great release from what I could see.
Mm-hmm.
So is certainly a very positive sign for him. I do
Yeah.
want to also talk a little more about the Niners. Obviously, you had a ton of experience. You got a lot of experience with Kyle Shanahan, and I'm curious to know about your take on Brock Purdy. I mean, he's got a few years under his belt, obviously, has looked what I would say is pretty impressive. I think he's shocked the world in a lot of ways, and he's shown that not only just on field but off field in the way he handles himself as a leader of the team. I'm curious to know, where you see that going, particularly when he's dealing with such a what I would call a genius in Kyle Shanahan.
Yeah, I have all the respect in the world for Brock Purdy, a guy going from Mr. Irrelevant to playing in Super Bowls so quickly. Really speaks to his work ethic, his determination, belief in himself. I mean, can you imagine? Here you are, like the last pick. Man, no one really wanted me. They drafted me. They had Jimmy. They had Trey Lance. I'm kind of just an afterthought. No, this dude was ready to go. So I have a lot of respect for him in that sense, and has continued to prove that he can do it. I mean, how he's paid. So there's the expectation level rises a little bit, right? All right, we paid you. What are you going to do? I do think that having played for Kyle Shanahan, Brock is like the perfect quarterback for him, right? He goes out and he executes the plays the way Kyle wants them executed. I know I didn't do that because I would question things and say, well, in New England, I learned it this way. And I knew that drove Kyle nuts. But I feel very fortunate to have been coached. Obviously, we talked about Josh, but also by Kyle. I learned a lot my time, not only in Cleveland, but in San Francisco about football. And really, I would say how run game, play action, movement, all of that, I learned a tremendous amount. Trust me, I don't have the time to coach right now. I got a 13-year-old son and 11-year-old daughter, but if I ever do, melding those two systems together is the offense that I would run because there's things that I love about both of them. But I think Brock does a tremendous job of understanding. We talked about the why. He understands what Kyle's looking for out there, and I think that's why they've had such success together. Kyle got him when he was young. He taught him the system, molded him the way he wanted to, and ultimately, look, they've had some great players around Brock, and so Debo's not there anymore. Kittle's getting older. McCaffrey, you got to hope stays healthy. He makes that offense go. And, hopefully Brandon Ayuk bounces back. Jennings, all of those guys have to play well. And ultimately, I think the one thing that you have to respect about Brock Purdy is he's a leader out there, right? He leads the team no matter what it is. And coming from the last pick in the draft, I think you just have to have the most respect for a guy like that.
Yeah, it's great watching Brock Purdy play. He's extremely accurate with the football, but it's also refreshing to see someone that's just standing in the pocket, processing the decision, making the right read, which I think is a cool segue into like what are you seeing for this 2025 meta in the NFL? We're starting to see a lot more scrambles. I think it's easy to see, Jaden Daniels having a phenomenal rookie season. He scrambled more than any quarterback has in NFL history, or sorry, just in 2025.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done the research to go that far back, but 87 scrambles compared to 47 scrambles for Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. So that large chunk gives me a lot to infer off of. But it seems though with more quarterbacks looking at the success Jaden Daniels had and trying to process, hey, should I be scrambling more? And comparing it to the Purdy still getting a lot of success, being as much in the pocket as he is. He does scramble a fair bit, a lot more now than he used to. But how are you breaking down 2025? How would you think about evaluating success? And if you're kind of like one of these up and coming quarterbacks, which style of play would you find yourself trying to practice more?
It's funny because that's what I'm dealing with my son right now. My son's way bigger, stronger, faster than I ever was, and I'm glad because I do think the trend is towards the Drake Maye, the Josh Allen, the Justin Herbert, these guys that the Jaden Daniels, that these guys that can do both. Me being the old school guy that I am, I always do believe that the game will come down to being able to drop back on third down, the most critical part of the game, see the defensive coverage and pick them apart by throwing the football. Now, if you have the God-given athletic ability that when nothing is there, you can make a play. And how many times have we seen Josh Allen get this far from the sideline and launch the ball down the field? And it's just an uncanny ability. And his receivers are really good at adjusting with them. Or you mentioned Jaden Daniels. The thing that I was so impressed with Jaden was that he was calm, right? He was cool the whole time. And yeah, he did scramble, but I never felt like he forced a scramble. It kind of came naturally to him. I think that's if you're going to have these dual threat quarterbacks, so to speak, they have to play quarterback first and go through the reads. And when things are there, you have to hit them. When they're not and they break down, then you expose them with your legs or by extending and throwing the football. But I do think that there's always going to be a place. The guy that I respect so much is Joe Burrow. I think he's the closest thing to a pure drop back passer we have in this league. And honestly, if the Bengals don't have a horrific start to the season, I think he could have been MVP. I mean, he played that well. And so there's always going to be a place for guys like that in the league that are cerebral, that can pick you apart by throwing the football. But I do think coaches look at a guy like Drake Maye or Josh Allen or Justin Herbert and say, look, I can call the play. He can drop back. There's nothing there. And I know he's going to make a good decision and make a good play for our football team. And I think that's very appealing, especially we talked about continuity. Guys, coaches are trying to win quickly, right? What's the best way to win quickly? Have a freak at quarterback, try to teach him along the way, but also know that he's going to bail you out with some superstar plays.
Yeah,
Amazing.
it
I
makes
got
their job so much easier, right? When they're not
Until it
when
doesn't, until they make a bad decision,
And
right?
that's the
I mean, look,
challenge. We've seen that for
we
a lot
all,
of these quarterbacks, right? Where they
yeah.
they end up actually relying too much on that and not enough on the brain, right?
Yeah. I would say Caleb Williams was a great example of that, and I think he will benefit greatly by Ben Johnson's tutelage by trying to make him play quarterback, right? I think Caleb's best game last year that was in London, they played the Jaguars, and he played quarterback. He dropped back, he was in rhythm, he threw the football, and he had a great game. I think that's the one thing I try to teach my son. Now, he's only played quarterback for 1 year at the 7th grade level, and I would try to tell him those things, and then I realized eventually I didn't tell him he could run the football. Hey, if you drop back and no one's there, pull the ball down and run because you're bigger and faster than everybody else. So by the end of the season, he realized, like, okay, I'm reading a smash concept, and it's really 7th grade football. That's all I have. If they clamp down on the hitch and the corner route's not there, I'm taking the ball and I'm running the football. And so I never had to really worry about that. I was staying in the pocket as long as I could, and I had a few scrambles here and there, but I was really trying to read coverage, get to the open guy, get through the progressions, which I think ultimately you want to do. And then you have a guy who's a freak that when all of that's gone, you let him. I mean, look at Josh Allen. What was it, 4th down last year? The 27-yard run was to beat the Chiefs, right? Like having a guy like that is a difference maker, and that's why he's an MVP.
yeah. I got like one last question for you, Brian. It's been lovely, like getting to do the research on all of the coaches you've gotten to experience. I'm curious if there's a coach, either big name, small name, whatever phase of your long career, either in the NFL or even beforehand, if there's a coach that we missed that like had a phenomenal impact or something that really stuck with you as you kind of took it through, the rest of your career, the rest of your life. If there's that one coach that you think didn't get enough shine in the course of this interview, would love to hear about it.
Yeah, I mean, I've had so many. I played for so many teams, right? And even going back to high school, I had a tremendous high school coach, Chuck Kyle, legendary coach in the state of Ohio. The guy who really taught me to first play quarterback was a coach named Nick Restifo, who sadly passed away last year. He was our offensive coordinator, quarterback coach. I think back to my quarterback coaches at Michigan State, Doug Nussmeier, whose son is Garrett, who's a stud quarterback at LSU. That was my first quarterback coach at Michigan State, and I've been able to stay in touch with him throughout, I guess now, 20 something years. It's crazy. Dave Warner, who was my quarterback coach there when I eventually got to play at Michigan State. But 2 guys in the NFL that come to mind. One, Rich Scangarello, who's kind of bounced around a lot, but he was with me in San Francisco. And one of the things that stuck with me is just how much he built me up, how positive he was, and just saying, like, dude, you're one of the best throwers of the football in the world. And I never thought about it that way, right? Like when you're a starting quarterback and you're probably in that 3rd tier, you're like, man, I'm not as good. People probably don't think I'm as good as that top tier. But he kind of changed my perspective. Like, dude, there's only 32 of you guys in the entire world. Like, think of yourself that way. And I never really had that positive reinforcement before. And that really meant a lot to me. And then another guy who, oddly enough, the best streak of play I ever had in my entire career was in Chicago, and the offensive coordinator there was Dal Loggins, and he was my quarterback coach in Cleveland, and he was the offensive coordinator in Chicago, and we had a great relationship, more like a friend relationship than a coach and player. And when I took over because Jay Cutler got hurt, I would come in and meet with him and be like, "What do you want to do this week?" And I was like, "Geez, no one's ever really asked me that before." And we would game plan together and do all of these things. And I had a great quarterback coach there who actually I had looked up to as a kid because he played quarterback at the high school that I went to, Dave Ragone. And so it was like one of the greatest quarterback rooms that I ever had. It was a guy I looked up to as a 13-year-old kid while he was playing quarterback for my high school, And this guy who I was really close with, and we would sit in there and come up with game plans. And the cool thing about Dahl, because of his influences, we talk about those tree branches crossing, right? He kind of melded that Patriot system and that Kyle Shanahan system together for me. And it was beautiful. It was like it was the perfect fit for me. It was a lot of empty, a lot of quick game, run, play action boots. I loved bootlegs. I love throwing on the run. So he incorporated a lot of those. And I mean, I think it was 5 straight games of 300 yards or more and 2 touchdowns, something like that, until Clay Matthews fractured my forearm in Lambeau on Thursday night. But it was a great run. And Dahl's a good coach, and he's actually the head coach at Appalachian State right now. Yeah, probably not two names that people wouldn't think of right away, but two guys who had a lot of impact on my career.
And to
Very
bring it
cool.
full circle here, you talked about what was so beautiful when you were working with him was that he involved you in you getting to pick some of the plays and you being a part of that
Hmm.
game plan. And it's because of that why, right? You were finally
Yeah.
getting the why and not just the what. You were starting to understand it because you were doing it together. So it's a
Yeah.
beautiful thing to hear that. No, it's incredible.
Yeah, and there's certain plays as a quarterback, and I don't know why this is. Maybe because it worked for you the first time and you fell in love with it, but there's just certain plays that when it comes into your helmet, you're like, I got this. And then there's certain plays, and I've been around coordinators who, you say, I'm not really sure about this play. Like, trust me, I love this play. It's gonna work. Well, I'm the one with the ball in my hands, and I have to feel really good about it. And so there was never a play called when I played for Dow that I didn't like because I had already approved them all. We had worked on them together. And I got to see that relationship with Josh and Tom Brady for so long. And obviously he has every right to basically say, no, I don't want that one in, take that one out. But, for me, where I was always at in my career was trying to establish myself. I never felt like I really had that right, but Dal empowered me to do that. And it showed on the field. I played really well and had a lot of confidence and knew exactly, he called the play. I knew exactly what the goal of that play was and could go out and execute it.
Amazing.
Very
Well,
good.
Brian, this was an absolute pleasure having you on, getting to talk football, getting to talk quarterback, which is, of course, our favorite position. It's all we talk about. So, really, really appreciate you coming on and hope we can have you on again in the future.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, guys.